Righty, I think we're live, everyone. Maybe put your hands up in the air if you can hear me. This is always the rather auspicious start to a live stream, isn't it? You're never quite sure if you're on air or not. And I think we are on air now. So while we're waiting for a few more people to join us, let's see. Yeah, I think we're live. While we're waiting for a few more people to join us, what I thought we'd do is, g'day Unknown Flicks, is I just thought we'd start with a bit of a recap. Before we do that, let me introduce you to my new Batman stress ball. I was at a Christmas function last weekend, and my Secret Santa gift was a Batman stress ball, which is come in rather handy over the last couple of days, sitting at my desk. So let me start with g'day guys, everyone's starting to come in now. Let me start with a bit of a recap, because obviously this is part two of a two-part Forge live stream. And for those who maybe have never experienced the Forge before, this is your first time, the Forge live streams, I don't do them as regularly. The idea with the Forge live streams are, though, that the focus was especially on issues around masculinity and for men that are of importance to discuss and for us as men to contemplate and to delve a little bit deeper into. And back in July, before things got extremely and insanely busy for me, I did a part one of this Forge live stream on the problem of pornography. And if you haven't seen part one, feel free to go back and watch part one later on. And what I do is I lay out what you would call it a natural law, basic human reasoning and evidence-based case for why pornography is not in the best interests of the human person. And then part two, which is this episode here, is I want to talk about practical tips for dealing with a pornography problem or a pornography habit, or if things are getting out of control in your life and you want to take some control back. Because there are, and this is often where things fall down, people get told, hey, look, the success of porn consumption is taking over our lives, it's not good, we've got to do something about it. But then they're left in the wilderness, basically, and there's not much in the way of practical advice. Well, how do I actually take control back? And by the way, the principles that I'm going to expound here today, they're very practical, and they apply to anything really in your life that perhaps has got out of control. So if you're watching this today, it might not be pornography, it might be something like eating. That was something that was a big deal in my life a few years ago. My eating got really badly out of control. And it was about 16, 17 years ago, not that long ago, I got as big as 138 kg. And you wouldn't recognize me. I was a very different person, weighed a lot. I was morbidly obese. And so there's any number of areas where we can actually start to lose control in our lives. And these tips here are practical really for men in a whole slew of areas as well. Just before I get into the practical tips, I quickly want to recap the two main points from the last live stream about the issue of pornography, why it would be such an issue for us as men. The first is the fact that there is what you would call and it's hugely important, a relational aspect to our human sexuality. And we often, in this age, which is very mired in hedonism, we tend to view human sexuality solely through the lens of things like biological urge, self-gratification, pleasure-seeking, and that's it. Now, human sexuality is a very pleasurable thing, and it makes sense. There's a method to it's not madness, of course, but there's a method to the madness in the sense that what it does is it allows us or encourages us to participate in this wondrous and profound gift of human sexuality for the sake of the transmission of human life, the bringing forth procreation, bringing forth new human beings. If it wasn't fun, we probably wouldn't do it. And also, there's another aspect to it. It allows us. So my wife and I, there's a bonding between us as spouses that occurs through the sexual act, and that's a profoundly good thing. It's something that binds us together in a very profound and intimate kind of way. But there's another aspect to it too, and that's the communal nature of human sexuality, the relational nature, the fact that that it draws us into this profound and intimacy of relationship between two persons. And what it does is really, as human persons, we really thrive in community. We thrive in an environment of self-giving love when we give of ourselves to something bigger than ourselves, when we give of ourselves particularly in relationship to other people. And yeah, human sexuality is no different. And what pornography does is takes our human sexuality, that profound and wondrous gift, and it says to us basically, instead of directing it outwards in an act of bodily, self-giving intimacy with another human person, pornography says take the gift of your sexuality and turn it back in on itself. Use it solely for your own pleasurable self-gratification. And what we tend to do in the process is we tend to objectify persons, we reduce them to objects, we use them for our own gratification and nothing more. And that's one of the big problems with porn. The problem is, as I said in the last presentation, is not that pornography shows too much of the human person. The problem is it doesn't show enough. We reduce other human persons to bodies and nothing more that we use for our own gratification then dispose of. And in the last live stream, I told the story about the Inuit people. And when they have a wolf that bothers a village, they have an age-old technique for dealing with it. So when they have a wolf that threatens the village, what they do is they take a razor-sharp, long-handled blade, they sharpen it. It's this thing, it's just this fine, sharp, razor-sharp blade. They coat it in seal blood, they freeze it. They coat it in more seal blood, they freeze it again. They keep doing this. You've got several layers of frozen seal blood. They take the blade and they stick it in the ground on the outskirts of the village, blade up, and then they coat it in fresh blood and they leave it. The wolf smells the blood, comes along, starts licking away at this blood popsicle, and as it's licking through layers of frozen blood, its tongue, its mouth starts to go numb. And finally, when it gets through the blade, its tongue is now numb, its mouth is now numb, and it slashes open its tongue, it slashes itself open, and it goes into a bit of a frenzy because there's warm, fresh blood now in its mouth. But because it's all numb, it doesn't realise that it's its own blood and that it's literally about to devour itself. In this sort of bloodlust, it literally bleeds itself to death. And that's not a particularly helpful analogy if you're about to have lunch, but I think it is an excellent metaphor for what pornography and when we objectify other persons, what it does to us. It takes the gift of our sexuality, the gift of our life, and it turns it in on itself. And so often when you hear people talking about objectification, they talk about it in the sense of it's how harmful it is or wrong it is to objectify other people. And I believe that's absolutely true. But they also forget that objectification harms us, the people who might be engaging in objectification, because it diminishes us and our human flourishing, and it turns us in on ourselves instead of allowing us to direct our lives outwards, where we really find our human flourishing as human persons. So that's point number one. And so pornography attacks that relational nature of human sexuality. Secondly is the impact of pornography in society and some of the risks I talked about in the last. I'm not going to recap all of them, but one in particular is the impact of porn on our brains. And that's what I really want to get into today, why we need these practical tips, because what pornography does is it tricks the natural reward pathway in your brain. Your natural reward pathway is something that gives you a natural reward, as the name suggests. You get a hit of dopamine, the pleasure chemical, for doing certain things that are actually good for us to do. So eating food, we need to keep eating to stay alive. And so our brain gives us a hit of the pleasure chemical dopamine when we eat food. It says this, you can, for example, if you start eating lots of high sugar food, your brain just starts firing off with this artificial reward, lots of dopamine, because it likes it. And this is great, keep doing this. And what happens is this starts to have an impact on our neural pathways. It rewires the way our brain works. And we can have a brain that starts to become hyper-responsive to that thing that's giving us the dopamine hits. It's really how any sort of addictive cycle starts in the brain. And so pornography does the same thing, because part of our natural reward cycle is that we receive a natural hit of dopamine for things like bonding between human persons, intimacy, and sexuality. Our brain says, keep doing this is good. And so pornography tricks that system and it introduces an artificial reward. And my reading of the research on this and the experts who talk about it is apparently the novelty factor is a big part of the reason. The fact that you, with the click of a mouse now, thanks to internet pornography, you can click on a different person, a different scenario, just like that. Your brain gets hooked on the novelty factor, the fact that it can just click on all these different images and scenarios and it can have what it wants at its sort of fingertips, if you like. And if we're not careful, and for a lot of people, and I've worked with and I've mentored people who have actually been in this situation, their brain becomes hyper-responsive to pornography, to the point where they would much rather have pornography than the real thing. And Cisco says his tongue hurts after the wolf story. Sorry about that, mate. Hopefully you enjoy your breakfast, or your lunch, or dinner. I'm not sure what time of the to the day it is where you are. But I'll just, by way of an example, I was mentoring one young man who had a situation where his wife says to him, "I'll see you upstairs in 10 minutes." And then she wakes up the next morning and realises that he hadn't come upstairs at all. And he'd just gone and looked at porn instead. His brain, instead of going and having the real flesh and blood, the real deal sexual intimacy and making love to his wife, he was pulled in the direction of the pornography because his brain was just so used to that. And so how do we take back control is the key question. Like I said, we hear a lot today about how, g'day Nightbreed, we hear a lot today about how, hey, porn is harmful, it does these harms, we should avoid it, we should get it under control, but very few people tell us or offer practical advice about how to do that. And so what I want to do today in this session is actually look and delve into that practical advice. As I said, these tips have application in lots of other areas of life as well, not just anything that's out of control. How do I take back control? How do I actually get a semblance of control back in my life where I might be losing it? And a lot of this too comes from my experience of mentoring guys, and sometimes with very, very serious pornography issues that have done huge destruction in their marriage and family life, and just some of the practical things that I've picked up along the way. So the first point is this. First practical tip is honesty is absolutely essential. And this is often something we forget, and we're very good at being dishonest with ourselves when we have a struggle or a problem. Particularly if something's got out of control. What we tend to do is we tend to try and rationalize it, we tend to try and justify it. So what we tend to do is we try and minimize the impact of what's actually happening. And so the first thing you need to do if you're going to deal effectively with a pornography problem is be honest about the scope, the level, and the nature of that problem. You need to be honest with yourself. So if you've got a pornography problem where things are out of control and you're consuming several hours a day and it's starting to encroach on your work and you're starting to steal time from your boss to look at porn and like that's where it's got to, it's no good saying to yourself, well, I've just got a sort of minor issue. It just crops up every now and then. But that's more than every now and then. That's something that's starting to really take over in a big way. And so you've got to be honest about it. And why you need to be honest about it is because you can't effectively and successfully diagnose the actual nature of the issue and begin to find a cure until you're actually honest about the diagnosis, about what's going on. So you've got to be honest with yourself, and that's really difficult. It's painfully difficult in any area of our lives. We, as I said, we like to minimize, we like to rationalize, we try and it's hard. Human pride is a funny thing, and we don't like to admit that we've failed. We definitely don't like to admit, I think particularly as men, that perhaps things have got out of control, that we're not in control, that perhaps there's something compulsive or addictive in our life. We don't like, it's a hard thing to actually bring ourselves to admit, man, my life is out of control in this area and I really need to sort it out. It takes humility and there's a courage in that too. It's very easy to diagnose problems in others, a lot harder to do it in ourselves. So honesty is absolutely essential, but it's the first place we've got to start. If you are married, you're in an intimate relationship with someone else, I think also we owe them our honesty too. And almost certainly if you're married then and you're a male or you're a female, there's about 27% of pornography addicts now, the research tells us somewhere around that vicinity are females, which is startling when you think about the difference between the male and female brain and how they work. But you've got to be honest because it's going to have a bearing on your intimacy with that person. And probably if you're married, your spouse has probably already noticed that something is amiss. Even if they haven't figured it out or they're not aware about the pornography, that they will know something's not quite right, even if they can't put their finger on it. So I think we owe them our honesty. And just be aware that in that process of honesty, that particularly if you're a husband and you're talking to your wife, you're someone in an intimate relationship and you're about to talk to your girlfriend about this or your fiance or whoever it is, they are going to potentially, the first thing if they don't already know about it is it's going to be extremely difficult for them because what happens with females is, and it's fascinating the way the research, I was reading some research recently about this difference between males and females, is that females in particular really, g'day Warren, females in particular view emotional infidelity as a lot more serious than males do, and pornography would fit into that category. They really, for a lot of females, that this has been my experience of working with and mentoring people who have struggled in this area, is that they take it in a very hard way, and it's understandable. For them, there's a sense of, am I not good enough? Why is he looking at other women? you know, am I not good enough? Am I not attractive enough? Is my body not good enough? All those kind of things start to come to the fore. And so it's just something to be aware of, that you're going to have to actually suck it up. And in your honesty, it's that can be that's probably the hardest hurdle for a lot of people to actually get over, is the first admission. G'day, Christopher. That in actual fact they've got an issue, and telling someone about it. Number 2 practical tip is that you need community around you of some kind to help you. A lot of men think, well, I'll just deal with this on my own, and we like to be the lone wolf, the isolated guy. We don't really want to let too many people in. I'll just figure out a way to deal with it. Look, some blokes that can work for, but normally for most blokes it's not enough. You actually need, and there's lots of reasons why we'll come back to in one of the later tips why community is so essential for us. But you need people to help keep you accountable. You need people to help support you in the struggle. And one thing I'd say is, when you're thinking about an accountability partner or a buddy who's going to help you in this space, then what you don't want, and if you're someone who's helping someone else with accountability, you don't want to be like a slave driver or some sort of weird tyrant. You know, have you looked at porn this week? You don't want someone like that, because if that's all you get and you don't have a genuine sort of friendship connection and a sense of support from that person, then what you will do is you'll probably almost certainly very quickly give up, because all you're sensing or you're receiving is condemnation. Anytime you stuff up and make a mistake, which happens regularly in this struggle, then what happens is, you know, the last thing you want is to be faced with like what feels like a wall of condemnation. What you actually want is, you need someone around you who's going to say, hey, here's some accountability, but also I'm in this with you. What can I do to actually get into the trenches with you? But you need accountability, and you need people to give yourself to, and we'll talk more about that in an upcoming point a bit later on, about why community is essential, but you need that support around you. Number 3 point is very, very practical, and that's to think about your screen time, the location of the screens in your house, and things like filtering software. So there are plenty of options out there that will do anti-porn filtering, or you could, if you don't want to invest in something like that, there are things as simple as putting restrictions on your own device and then giving someone else the password, the admin password, so that you can't control and turn those restrictions off or on. But there's a couple of things. Even if you're not looking at porn, the more time we spend on our screens, the more of a sort of a normalizing of being on, the easier that pathway becomes to, I'll just look at porn while I'm here. You know, I get bored. I'm on the screen so long, all of a sudden I'm bored, I'm saturated with other things, and then it's like, look at porn. So screen time, think about screen time. One practical thing you can do is, most devices now, or if not, you can download apps that will do this for you. They'll actually track your screen time and give you a weekly or daily report about how your screen time is doing. That's a really good thing to do. I have this on my phone, actually, just for the sake of not spending so much time on my phone that I'm not actually present with my family and my loved ones and in the real world. And what's interesting about this app is that it's really challenging. Once a week on a Monday, I get this report, and to see if my screen time's gone up and how much on average each day that you're actually on a screen, it can be actually really confronting, but in the good kind of way that causes you to actually do something about your behavior. So those kind of apps can be helpful. Secondly is the location of screens in your house. Try and keep screens out of bedrooms or out of private spaces where no one is going to see them, and as much as possible, use the devices in places where there's going to be high traffic or people are going to see what's actually on your screen. It's a very basic little thing, that natural, what you might call the natural shame factor of, is someone going to see what I'm looking at, can actually be really helpful. And we forget about that. We often try and go straight to the filtering thing, where we get a piece of filtering software to try and filter out pornographic images. To me, if you do that without addressing the other issues, though, what happens is it's kind of like someone putting a burglar alarm in their house and not actually bothering to fix all the broken windows and locks and doors. The burglar alarm's no good. It's you're still going to have the problem that you've actually got. You've got to address the frontline stuff first. So location of screens and screen time. Then when you're doing filtering, any sort of filtering software that you get, then what you do is make sure that you get something that's going to work across multiple devices and multiple platforms. So make sure, and most of them do today, but this used to be more of an issue when they were just getting started, sort of 5-10 years ago. is sometimes you'd have filtering software that would work on a computer, but it wouldn't work on a tablet, or it would work on a Windows-based machine, but it wouldn't work on an iOS and an Apple machine. So what you want is something that'll work across device or a platform on your computer. You tend to sort of stick with it. But what is likely to change is your smartphone, your phone, or a tablet. They are more regularly updated, and you may switch platforms. And on those devices, it's not uncommon for people to do that. So having filtering software where it will work across all platforms and all devices means you don't have to have a new learning curve each time. It's just the same system across all of them, and you know how it works, and it works as it is. The second thing about filtering software, or the third thing about filtering software I think it's worth noting, is that that what you need to do is make sure that you've got filtering software that has an accountability feature. It's not enough just for it to filter out the images. You want some sort of accountability feature where you can have a buddy or a partner who's going to work with you in this space. And what happens is the software, if you look at deliberately go seeking out pornography, and yeah, this takes courage and a bit of humility, that's for sure. No one likes this, but you know, that it'll send an email or a text message or a message of some kind to someone else to say, hey, look, Brendan's struggling in this area. He's going looking at porn. Maybe give him a call and just encourage him and see how he's going. So accountability is absolutely essential. We know from the research that one of the most effective limiters and controllers and shapers of human behavior is accountability. Is someone going to see what I'm doing? Am I going to be seen doing what I'm doing here? It's hugely effective. Next practical tip is when you're dealing with a porn problem, don't just think about the porn. Think a step back from the porn. Think about the triggers. And this is often where a lot of people get stuck. They think, right, I'm going to fight this porn problem. It's got out of control in my life. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fight it. I'm not going to look at porn when I get on my computer. I would say that's a step too late. If you're thinking about how do I not look at porn when I'm on my computer, it's too late. It's a step too late. You need to take it a step back. And what you need to do, and I say this to every man who would come to me or a person who would come to me and say, I've got a pornography problem, what do I do? The first thing I would encourage them to do is say, right, for the next couple of weeks, just keep a written diary somewhere, or a diary of some kind, and just diarise your day, just random, not in great detail, just jot down all the things that happen each day, and then include in that diary any time that you look at pornography. Why would you do that? Well, after a period of 2 weeks, or even if they can do it over a month, it's even better. What happens is you start to notice patterns will begin to emerge. So, for example, it is very common for people to say, and I'll say this to people, what was happening in your life that day you looked at porn? Is it a particular day or time where you're more prone to looking at pornography? That's the first thing. Second thing is you might start to notice a pattern with certain things that trigger you to want to look at pornography. So a very common thing, particularly for men, is things like stress. Workplace stress, or school stress, or study stress, or stress in the family. And what happens is often men go to pornography as a way to sort of, it can be like a comfort thing or a control thing. And so if you can begin to recognize what the trigger is, that's where you need to deal with it. So if you know, well, stress is something that really has a triggering effect, and whenever I get stressed, that's the day that I look at porn. You know, if workplace stress affects me or study stress affects me, then I go and look at porn. What you want to do is you want to put strategies in place to deal with the trigger, not to deal with looking at the computer screen at that point. It's too late. So, okay, how do I deal with that stress? And this could be anything. It's not just porn. It could be an eating issue for some people. They go to food after have a stressful day. What am I going to do to deal with that trigger? So it might be, I know that on a stressful day, that on the way home, I stop and I just spend 20 minutes debriefing at some lovely park that's near my home or something like that, or in the spot in the back garden where I can sit and just reflect on life and just debrief everything that's happened. Or I might get home and go for a run, or I might go and hang out with a friend and do something that we enjoy doing together, but something to actually deal with and put that stress in order and actually to take control of that triggering moment that causes you to then want to look at the pornography. It's hugely important, recognizing what the things are. Another thing to look for is patterns. Often we do certain addictive behaviors or compulsive behaviors often as a comfort thing. And so it might be that we're just used to sitting. This is one thing I noticed in my life with eating food. I could go through a whole week and I would eat relatively well, but then I would sit down on a weekend and a Friday and Saturday night, and my mind had got used to this and sort of got into this mentality of, I treat myself on the weekends, and I would just go nuts and eat atrocious food. So it was a matter of recognizing, okay, I have to break that cycle and start associating Saturday and Sunday nights with things other than just binging on food. So you might notice similar patterns with pornography, and how do I actually start to associate those and deal with that? These particular spaces and zones are a bit more risky for me. Next important practical step and tip in dealing with pornography problem is to remember these two things: first steps and small changes. So first steps and small changes. Here's what happens often when people say, I want to deal with a compulsion or a problem in my life. They set themselves the end goal. I want to be free of this thing. So I'm sick of the control that pornography has on me. So what I want to do is I want to be rid of this porn habit. And that's the end goal, and that's great. But then all they do is focus on the end goal. Now, the goal-setting experts tell us that if that's all you do, you will develop what's called obsessive passion. And you get fixated on the end goal. And here's the thing, if that's what happens, you're less likely to achieve the end goal. Think about it like this, and I say this to every person who comes to me with this issue. It's like climbing Mount Everest. You don't get to the summit of Mount Everest by obsessing about the summit of Mount Everest. That's not how you get there. You will never get there if you do that. What you've got to do is you've got to set these first steps and these small changes and smaller goals along the way. So, my first goal is to get to base camp. The next goal is that I've got to get to the next camp. Or then once it starts to get tougher, you climb above that oxygen deprivation level, your goals start to become smaller. I've got to, the next 100 steps or the next kilometre. And what happens is you bite it off in smaller bite-sized pieces, and you set those goals. And then what happens is, as you bite off those smaller bite-sized pieces, then you will find yourself suddenly one day on the top of Mount Everest looking back and going, I made it now. I actually got to the top of the summit. But the way that you got there was not by obsessing about the end goal, but by setting those smaller first steps and small changes. So here's an example. You might set yourself a goal, I'm going to run a marathon. Now, I've never run a marathon personally myself. I struggle with running fitness. It's a solo pursuit. I've always preferred team sports or other types of pursuits, and running is just something has never really, nothing's ever intrigued me or fascinated me about it. So for me, that would be something I just would be extremely hard to imagine myself running a marathon. But if I wanted to get there, here's how I'd have to do it. The end goal is running the marathon. The first steps and the small changes I need to make in my life to get to that end goal are, right, my first step and the goal I'm going to set myself each day is, when I get home from work, I'm going to do a training run. But I need to break it down even more. The first goal, before I even get to the training run, is I'm going to get home from work and I'm going to put on my running shorts and my running shoes. So I'm going to put on my running gear. That's the first step. That's the first goal. Now, if I make that the goal, that's a very achievable goal. Now, here's the thing. If I put the running gear on, I'm more likely to go for the training run. If I go for the training run, then what happens is I'm more likely to actually run the marathon. I don't get there just by obsessing about the end goal. I've got to make those first steps and small changes. The other thing about small changes that's really important is often when you're battling a pornography problem, you get stuck. You have a moment where you fall over again, or you fall off the wagon and you think, I failed, I'm useless, I'm hopeless, I'll never do this. And we get so stuck in the negative and we get so mired in what we haven't been able to achieve, we forget about the small steps we've actually have achieved along the way. And I always say that to people that I'm mentoring, stop and think about, in this moment where you've perhaps fallen off the wagon, look back at how far you've come and look at all of those small steps you've made. Here you are, you're halfway up Everest right now. And you're sitting in the snow and you're frustrated because you've fallen over. And Everest, the top of the summit, seems like miles away. But stop and look back how far you've come. You haven't got that far to go. So it's a really good thing. So, for example, if you know that, on Friday and Saturday nights, that's a particular vulnerable time for you to look at pornography. But actually commit yourself to that course of action before you find yourself in the situation. You're more likely to have a sense of control and purpose if you've committed yourself to the course of action before you get into the situation. This is a really important point. The next one is always have a plan for failure. Now, it's not nice to fail, but it's the reality. What pornography is, it can be a very compulsive thing. It targets men in particular, where we're very vulnerable. Men, we are visually aroused by nature, and that's a good thing in the right context. But with pornography, pornography knows how to get us right where we're at our most vulnerable. And so it can be a real struggle, a real battle to actually deal with that and begin to take control again. And so it's very common. It's very normal for us to fall off the wagon in this struggle. And first thing is, don't beat yourself up over that. Don't think, oh, that's it, it's useless, I can never do this. No matter how many times you fall over, just keep getting up. That's the key. And keep asking yourself, what can I learn from this little misstep here so that I can put it into better practice next time? But here's the thing, always have a plan for failure. What am I going to do if I fall off the wagon? And that little plan for failure might be, well, the first thing I do is I might have a friend of mine I get in contact with and I say, look, man, I've just gone and looked at porn again. And that friend knows that in that moment they are supposed to say to me, look, it's all good. You can keep doing this, Brennan. They're supposed to remind me and help me to sort of get up out of the snow and start climbing to the top of Mount Everest again. They know that that's their job, to encourage me, to keep me accountable. Not to condemn, not to tell me, oh, you're a failure, you're a loser, but to actually support me in that. I might also have a little mantra that I remind myself of, something I've written down somewhere. You know, this is a fight worth fighting. You can do this. Yeah, you've stuffed up, but tomorrow's another day. Get up, keep walking. The top of the summit's not that far away. So you just, and why it's important is you speak stuff like that out loud. It actually does help to start to shift your mindset, and it does, I mean, look, you can't magically resolve every crisis in the world with words. That's for sure. But what you can do is you can definitely shape mindsets and by the way you think about a situation. And just speaking certain things out loud will often help to give you a sense of clarity in the midst of a struggle. So have a plan for failure, and then have a little, the next part of it will be, right, well, tomorrow what I'm going to do is X, Y, and Z to actually get back into the fight. You have a little 2 or 3 steps you just remind yourself of. Now, why is that plan for failure important? Well, in my experience, people who go into a pornography fight, if they don't have a plan for failure and they stuff up, then what happens is they tend to fall down the rabbit hole and stay there a lot longer than guys or people who do have a plan for failure. So the people who don't have a plan for failure, often what happens is they fall off the wagon and they go, I can't do this, it's too hard. They see all the negatives, they sit in the snow looking back down the mountain instead of looking up at the top. They look back down, they think it's too hard, I can't do this, I can't get there, and they just sit there. They sit there and just get stuck for maybe days or weeks or even months before they go, I've got to do something about this. I've got to get up and start walking again. Men and women who have a plan for failure, what tends to happen is they execute that plan. They know, when I'm in that situation, this is what I have to do. And those people are more likely to actually stand up quicker and start walking again, trying to get to the top. By the way, this is how the special forces work in a military context. The special forces, one of the reasons that they're so special is because they actually train over and over and over and over and over again for these various scenarios what to do. And their training fundamentally is built on this important principle that when you're in the scenario, always trust your training. Always fall back on and rely on your training. And so that's what happens. It's not like they've got some super amazing gift for dealing with conflict and crisis. It's that they've trained for that. They've prepared for it. And they know, I fall back on my training when I'm in the crisis. So when you're in the crisis, fall back on your training, on your crisis plan. That's what you have to do. Someone's asked a question here. I can see what you're saying, but did you address societal stuff like the collapse of marriages earlier on? The stuff, the previous episode, I talked more about sort of the natural law arguments around why pornography is a factor. And maybe if you save that question for the end, Gunshark, we can perhaps talk about that too as well. Okay, so next important point is plan ahead for any disruptions in your routine. Here's what often happens with people when they're dealing with with a pornography problem. They get a really good routine going, and then something disrupts it. Maybe it could be unplanned. So all of a sudden you have a death in the family, or you lose a job, or you have to find a new home, and all of a sudden your whole routine gets thrown into disarray and you have to start all over again. Or, more commonly, it can be something that you know is going to happen. So this time of year, Christmas holiday season. Christmas holiday season, for a lot of people, they have holidays, they take time off, things go quiet, the whole nature of a person's routine will change. And it's in those downtimes and those routine changes that what happens is people can all of a sudden their whole routine and their plan for dealing with pornography goes right out the window as well, because they're like, oh, hold on, it's not working the way it normally does because I'm not in the same routine. So plan ahead for that. Think to yourself, okay, if I'm going away on holiday for a week, what am I going to do to preempt any potential issues when I'm on holiday? A big factor with holiday time is downtime. I've got more downtime than I would normally have, which, you know, as my grandma used to say, the devil makes light work of idle hands, Brendan. And so it's like, well, what am I going to do to actually ensure that I'm not just stuck there in boredom and to the point where I go, oh, I'm so bored, I'll just look at porn. So how do I actually deal with that change in routine? So actually plan ahead for disruptions and think about a plan for dealing with a disrupted routine. Next important point is to actually build a proactive habit of self-giving and community in your life. And this is the next three, which are the final sort of practical tips, I would say are quite key in the struggle if you're dealing with a pornography problem. Often when people deal with a pornography problem, what they tend to do is they think, I don't want porn anymore in my life. I don't want it consuming me. I want to deal with this. I want to take control back. And so they have this concept, they frame it in the negative. I've got to say no to this. I want to kick this out of my life. I want to get rid of this. It's not enough just to frame it in the negative. That's the reactive part of the plan. Reactive is obviously important. You also need a proactive part of the plan. It's really about culture versus culture. You're trying to change the culture, the whole culture of your personal culture of your life. And so if you've got a culture that's stuck in pornography, it's not just porn that is actually part of that culture. That culture will be driven by probably things like there'll be a little bit of hedonism you might not realize is happening, possibly a sense of leisure time and self-gratification that's out of control, and that sort of feeds the tendency to look at porn. There's a whole lot of factors there. So what you've got to do is you've got to say, right, I'm going to limit the negative culture. I'm going to say no to the negative culture, but I'm also going to say yes and attempt to proactively build a different type of culture in my life now. And one area that's key is if pornography is something that's built on, as I said earlier, a culture of self-gratification, then what you've got to do is say, right, how do I build a culture of self-giving into my life now instead, to try and actually counterbalance the tendency towards self-gratification? What things can I start doing with my life that are actually going to promote a culture and a habit of self-giving, where at the moment I'm consumed by a porn habit, which is a habit of self-gratification ultimately? And so you've got to actually do that. This is often why people just say, I'll kick out the self-gratification stuff. And then they sit there, bored, with an empty house. And what happens? Self-gratification comes knocking again on the door. And they're like, oh, I'll come back in. It's pretty boring and empty otherwise. So what you've got to do is fill that house, your life, with a different type of culture. So may the pot with you is said as something. Here's one. Instead of avoiding porn, direct your attention at worthwhile things. Watch a real movie, read a book, write a book. Porn is a symptom of boredom. Try and do something difficult that'll keep you busy. It's a really good point. So for me, I'm a married man. I've got 5 kids. And on top of that, I am the founder and director of a charitable organisation that I set up that funds my work. I do a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of other stuff. I've got this YouTube stuff on the go. There's a lot. My danger is keeping that balance so that my family and the important things don't ever get usurped by less important things. But the point is that I'm not sitting around just sort of doing nothing, waiting for something to sort of take control of my life. I'm self-directed. There's something proactive happening. What's key though is that there's a habit of self-giving is present in my life. Now, one way that's really present for me as a male, and I know that for a lot of males this isn't the case, and more males this is becoming a bit of an issue, is like I'm a married man and I've got kids, and having a wife and children is a hugely demanding exercise in self-giving, but it's a really important one. And so that's building that culture of self-giving into my life, and has built and continues to build that. And it starts to reshape your view of things in a very, very important way. So remember, what can I do? What are things that you can do that are focused on self-giving? And maybe towards the end, we'll talk about some of those other ideas that will maybe open the floor and people can put their ideas in, and we can sort of start throwing a few ideas around the mix in here. But in the meantime, the second of these three last points that are very proactive is think about your leisure time. What you might call rest and festival. It's important to have rest and festival in our lives because what it does is it avoids us from just becoming consumed by work. If you get consumed by work, that's not a good thing. But you also don't want to get consumed by leisure time as well. You don't want to get consumed by rest. If you get consumed by rest, you've just become lazy. And if all you do is you have just an overabundance of leisure time that's focused on my self-gratification, so I just watch the movies on and I'll do whatever feels good for me, and I'll take lots of downtime to do that, what tends to happen is that sooner or later your brain goes, oh, well, while we're here, and while I'm just taking all this downtime, and I'm getting a bit bored, and I'm self-gratifying, let's look at some porn. And what, I mean, that's a very rudimentary and simplistic way of presenting it, but you sort of get the point. It starts to build that habit again. So think about everything in your life having balance. And this is really important with dealing with a porn habit. Because if things are out of balance, then you get problems. So if you've got too much rest and leisure time, what tends to happen is a habit of hedonism starts to develop. It's all about just self-gratifying, laziness, sloth, all those other kind of things, and it opens up a doorway towards pornography. If it's the other extreme and you're just constantly working and there's no rest and festival, then what happens is you're so consumed by work that the stress starts to increase and your life is not as controlled and as ordered because you're just constantly rushing from thing to thing to thing. You're very achievement focused, and often that stress and that lack of order in a life can actually cause people to fall back into a pornography habit. So order is absolutely essential. Everything can think about the goods in your life, those various competing goods. The good of work, meaningful work, versus the good of rest and festival. And another thing when you think about rest and festival is actually try and have festival that's built around the human person and is communal and is actually meaningful. What we tend to do today is because we've lost that deeper sense of meaning, festival just tends to be in most people's minds getting drunk on the weekends. I have a hard week at work and then I get plastered on the weekend. That's not festival. It's not, that's self-gratification, it's hedonism. Authentic festival is about how do I celebrate with people? How do I actually spend time communing with people? And a bottle of wine gets opened for a reason, not for me to get plastered and to sort of numb myself to life, but because we're here celebrating together as friends. We're actually participating in something meaningful. We're here to celebrate someone's birthday. We're here to celebrate just the gift of community and being together. You know, so that's really, really important. That balance is so essential. And when those things get out of order, things like pornography start to take control. And as I said, it might not be pornography, it might be an eating habit or something that's out of order. Those things tend to get out of order when your life is out of order. And lastly, and this is really important, I would suggest, is have a plan for your life. Don't get dragged along by life. And too many blokes I've helped in this area, this tends to be an issue for them, is what happens is that they don't have much in the way of structure or clarity around what am I doing with my life? Do I have a plan for my life? So what happens is, first thing in the morning, they don't get out of bed. Basically, they get dragged out of bed by an alarm clock. Now, I'm not saying the alarm clock's the problem. I've got one and it goes off every morning. But the first thing is I've got a little routine. And I start my day with a period of contemplation and silence. And so what happens is I don't get dragged out of bed at the last minute, rush downstairs, eat my breakfast as fast as I can because I'm running late. I've left my alarm to the very last minute. And then I jump in the shower, rush out the door, dragged along through the subway, on the bus, whatever it is, in my car, off to work, dragged through the working day. And then I'm rushing to this thing, the next thing, the next thing. I'm being pulled along by life in that situation. What you actually need to be is someone who actually has, there are times when things get out of control and things happen and crises and busyness and all the rest of it. But most of the time it's not like that in our lives, and shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't need to be that way. Things are out of control because we don't actually have a plan. We're being dragged along by the day. We're not actually starting the day with a clear, coherent idea. And at a deeper level, what the heck is my life even about? Why am I here? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose? That's so essential. So essential. The human person, and one of the big things that we're struggling with in the West right now is a crisis of meaning. And a lot of people are struggling. It is the Nietzschean nightmare come true. God is dead, we have killed him. Well, what do we do for meaning now? And I think you look at our high suicide rates in the West, and they're off the charts. There's one area of reflection where that is a really big crisis. And so what happens is, if you don't have a deeper sense of meaning, it's hard to even order an individual day. Why am I doing these things each day that I'm doing? Now, possibly that deeper sense of meaning has been lost because your priorities are wrong. I'm so obsessed with work and obtaining this golden career moment where I'm going to be lauded and celebrated as the king of the hill, that I've lost, and I get there and I discover, oh, well, that wasn't as meaningful as I thought it was going to be. And so my work life might have got out of order, and my family life is suffering as a result. Or, so it's those kind of things. And often as men, that's a real struggle for us. We are the creatures who till the soil of the ground, and we love projects, and we're very project orientated. And the danger is we want to turn relationships into projects as well, that we can control and manage, and we solve the problems, and it'll all work perfectly. But that's not how relationships work, and it's not how life works. It's a very messy thing. But having a plan is essential. Having an idea of, and this is at its most simplest level, that starts with starting your day well. Here's the funny thing. You know what management and productivity experts are now? They've been saying this for a couple of years. They've been saying that if you want to actually achieve a lot more success and productivity in a day, the best thing you can do is actually start your day with a period of quiet contemplation and reflection on the day ahead. Now, if you're a religious believer of any sort, particularly if you're a Christian, you'll know that that's been the tradition for the Christian tradition right from the very beginning. You start your day with a period of contemplation and reflection, prayer, reading of the scriptures, whatever it is, to actually, and you sort of still yourself and think about the day ahead. And the funny thing is now we're realizing in actual fact there's a great wisdom and a prudence in that's really important for us. But for us as men in particular, I think, or just human beings, don't get dragged along by the day. If you get dragged along by the day, then what will happen is it's just more likely that as you're getting dragged along by the day, you're just acting purely on instinct. There's no sense of control. I'm not actually the one in the driver's seat. And then you get home at the end of a day like that, and what happens? All of a sudden, pornography is now in the driving seat instead of you. And so it's really, really important, I think, to have a plan. Don't get dragged along by life. That is the end of the practical tips that I want to offer. As I said, it's just straight to the point. Hopefully that they've been really helpful, and hopefully that there's some gems and nuggets of wisdom in there that you can pull out of that and say, yeah, I can apply that in my life. But as promised, let's open up the floor now on this topic of self-giving, and how do we build that culture, that habit of self-giving. What are some things that people think that maybe we could actually start doing to build into our lives, to create a counterculture within our own lives, perhaps, that's not a culture of self-gratification, one that is a culture of self-giving, one that actually gives us a sense of perhaps meaning and purpose, that refocuses us, reorders things. So I'd love to hear your ideas. Feel free to chuck them in the comment section. The other thing I'd say is I think it's important to when you're thinking about your day and planning a day, just while we're waiting for some of those comments to come flying in, one thing that's really helpful for people is just having lists and creating lists. So, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z today, and you jot it down somewhere, or you put it in a little productivity app or whatever. But one thing that apparently the way that lists actually work is that you're actually supposed to keep checking back in with them. So just remember that if you're creating a plan for your day of any sort, keep checking back in with that plan. Don't just jot it down somewhere, say at the start of a week, and then leave it. I have a whiteboard here in my office right beside me. What I do is I jot down each day what I have to do, the tasks, and then I keep checking back in with it on a regular basis. What's going on? Have I achieved that? Have I done this? So if we're thinking about a plan for your life and how to structure a life, then that's a really helpful tip to remember. If you're going to write things out, keep lists, keep productivity apps. They only really function and work well if you start the day by looking at it. You stop at various periods, not constantly, but you just sort of you on a regular basis. You're looking and going, okay, what have I done now? What have I got coming up the next couple of hours? And then you look back at the end of the day and you also assess how you're going. And the reason why looking back is important because it gives you a sense of perhaps where I've tried to bite off too much. And often this tends to be my problem. I will do 20 tasks in a day when realistically I was only ever going to achieve 10 or 15. And so I have to start to reprioritize and figure out how to reprioritize well by not trying to bite off too much. The floor is open. As said, that issue of self-giving or anything else that you want to talk about, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's just have a look at some of these comments that maybe I've missed along the way. Morden Gray says, if it's important, you'll find a way. If it isn't, you'll find an excuse. Yeah, and I think that's probably true. It is, particularly for us as men. I often say that, to people, well, if you want to know, people say, well, I love my wife or I love my family. I'll say, well, show me your actions. I include myself in this. If I claim to love my wife, how do I treat my wife? Am I really doing it? What am I doing? Or am I just finding excuses for why things are the way they are? Cisco says this: whenever I walk my dog at the local park, I take a trash bag and pick up any trash along the shoreline or in the brush or the sticks. Seems no one else cares. That's a really good point, Cisco. So that's a practical thing to do, right? So walking the dog's part of it, but also while you're out there, you're actually doing something to contribute. There's a sense of good stewardship over the environment and a concern for the local area in which you live. And I think that's a great idea. That's a great example of someone who's actually doing something that is proactive and is, there's a sense of self-giving there. It's not just about you, it's about the world around you. Morden Gray says, that's the reason so many fall into the habit, though, because it's easy and at their fingertips. I agree with you, though, in replacing the habit and removing yourself from the scenario/environment. And that's why technology is a big factor and always will be a big factor in this. You can't factor out the technology factor. There's a lot of factors in there, but you can't factor that out, and people often want to. I was somewhere recently where someone said, you just got to get the technology is not a problem at all. It's just you got to get it under control. And I said, yes, but part of the reason why the technology itself now gets out of control is because, as reading a book recently about an expert from Silicon Valley, as they say, Silicon Valley is we're in a race to the bottom of the brainstem, the most animalistic part. And so the technology itself tends to favour that. It favours the click, the impulse decision on the part of the user. So it's something you've got to factor into any sort of struggle or issue that you're dealing with here. Jared Horse says, thank you so much. I've been porn free for 1 year and it has changed who I am. Thank you for bringing this up. I cannot tell you the change this lifestyle has made. Everyone says I am a new person. That's awesome, Jared, and that's no mean feat to be porn free for a year. I was talking to someone about 6 months ago. Someone approached me and said, look, what do I do? And I gave this person some really clear advice. And then they came back to me about a month or so later and said, man, this is really difficult. Does it ever get better? And I said, you just got to keep fighting away at it. You got to keep working away at it. And I saw that person actually contacted me literally about 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And they just said, look, it's just amazing. Things have shifted dramatically. It took a while, and it took it was weeks of sort of challenging commitment to it. But I'm actually starting to see the difference now. And I think that's the thing. You do get there, but the reality is it takes time. Don't be afraid of that. Don't focus on, like I said, don't focus on the failures. Don't get stuck in that trap. And this is often what we tend to do, particularly if you're a bloke watching this. It's a real trap for us. We think, I'm not good enough, I've failed, I've messed up, and we think that loss of control means we've lost everything. We haven't. Just remind yourself you're halfway up Everest and you've got to look up and still keep climbing. Lone Wolf says, thanks for the talk. That's fine, Lone Wolf, and I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Here's Gunshark says, refocusing entertainment might help a bit. If men are bombarded with negative messaging and, say, romantic movies, that could be a serious problem that leads to porn. And you're right. And I think also the other thing is, by the way, what made me think of what I'm about to say, Gunshark, is your comment was immediately put in moderation by YouTube. And here's the funny thing. We supposedly live in the most open and sexually liberated culture of all time. But I would argue we don't. We don't talk honestly about these issues. We don't talk honestly. We don't talk honestly about authentic love, because without that, then sex is really a rather pointless, self-gratifying exercise. It's just hedonism. So how do we, without a marriage of human sexuality and self-giving love, what have you got? So we don't talk honestly about these things, and the classic example is you straight away get moderated because you've dared to mention porn. There's no context given to it, but we need to actually have the conversation. And I think honesty is so essential in this. We need to actually, because the silence not having the conversation, it doesn't benefit anyone. It just leaves a whole lot of people stuck in a pattern of behaving they don't know how to get out of, and no one's actually talking about and offering practical ways forward. But like you've said, refocusing our entertainment might help a bit. And this is definitely a factor for a lot of people. If whether it's negative messaging or a certain type of portrayal of things in the entertainment that you're consuming, it can have an effect on what happens next. PJW Jose, is it Jose? Sorry, I'm not sure. Josie, is it Josie or Jose? I'm sorry. I realised last video I might have been pronouncing your first name wrong. But anyway, this is the comment. PJW made a video on this a while back, reinforcing many of your points. Oh, I might have to go and have a look at that. I didn't realise. I'll have to go and check that out. I've been working in this space now for quite some number of years. I speak regularly to groups about pornography. As I said, I regularly have people contact me, whether it's blokes who just need advice, or it might be couples, or even the wife or girlfriend. All of a sudden, the porn problem has erupted in their relationship, and they sort of don't know what to do about it. It's more of an issue. It's becoming more of a problem. It has been for a while, and so what's interesting to me though is that noticing how more and more people outside of what you might call the usual channels are starting to notice there's a problem, and are starting to realise that there's actually something really good about people saying, you know what, I'm not going to just give myself over to this sort of cauldron of hedonism. I'm actually going to make some practical, proactive steps to take control. Anyone who says to me porn doesn't affect me or it has no effect on you, to me that's an absurdity. I think I mentioned this in my previous video, that's just nonsensical. We have an entire industry that is dedicated to the manipulation of behaviour and thought through images, just images. It's called advertising, it's called marketing. I used to be in a sales and marketing role. And we know that with the right images, just 30 seconds of the right images that are put together in the right way, we can influence your behaviour. We can cause you to go and buy a product or vote for a candidate or vote against someone. We can change the way you think about an issue just with 30 seconds of images that are constructed in the right way. That's how powerful these things are. So if you're consuming 2 hours a week or 2 hours a day of images that portray sexuality and human persons in a particular way, to say that has no effect on you at all, I'm sorry, that's just nonsensical. It doesn't mean that you are going to go out and become some sort of criminal offender. That tends to be the extremes we get stuck in, the false dichotomy. Well, I've never gone and raped someone, so therefore it doesn't have any negative effect. That's not how it works. Your thought life, your attitudes are still being shaped, even though most people will never go on and do horrific, horrible things with those things. There's definitely a shaping and an influencing that's happening. That's, as I said, that's what advertising is all about. So there you go, Jose. It is Jose. Apologies, in the last video I was referring to you as Josie. I apologise for that, Jose. So I think that's all I want to say. That finally, for those who are waiting for it, there it is. I've given you at long last. I apologise. It was July when we did part 1. Here's part 2, and it took us a while to get here, so I apologise for that. That we took so long to get here. Just to let you know, for those who are regular sort of watchers of my live stream and want to know what's happening next, next Tuesday it's another episode of the weekly live stream. So we're going to be talking about movies. In particular, I've got my tickets booked for The Rise of Skywalker. So we are going to talk about Star Wars predictions on Tuesday and a few other things as well. And then the following week, it's Christmas Eve here in New Zealand. So I am going to we're going to do a special Christmas Eve live stream. I thought that'd be a fun thing to do. We'll talk about, so if you're going to come back for that, start thinking about Christmas movies or Christmas content that you love to watch at this time of year. It might not even necessarily be Christmas themed, because we're going to open up the floor and talk about that. I thought I'd talk about also some people have asked me, could I share some of my LP, of my vinyl collection, some of my sort of favourite vinyl, and I thought I'd just bring a couple of those to the party. And also perhaps we'd talk about some movies. I finally got a chance to actually watch some films. I've had a couple of international flights in the last 2 weeks to go to speaking engagements. So I finally had a chance to watch some films that have been like Alita, Battle Angel. I finally got to watch it. So I thought I would review some of those films. We'd talk about just very quick, sort of quick fire review, and we could talk about some of those films as well. And that would be a good sort of pre-Christmas live stream to sort of focus on. And of course, there's The Mandalorian progressing. And someone's asked me if we could perhaps have a little chat about Watchmen as well. So we'll try and cram all that in on that Christmas live stream special. So thank you for tuning in. It's really awesome to have your support. Thank you for everyone who supports the channel. And if you want to contribute, this video is going to be demonetized because of the topic. That's the nature of it. You talk about this topic, straight away you get demonetized. I can't control that. So if you would like to support the channel, please, I'd really appreciate that. Every little bit helps. There's a link for PayPal in the description below, plus other subscription options are there as well. A huge thank you to everyone who supports the channel. It allows me to keep doing these live streams. If there's other topics that may the pulp be with you, it says, have you watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood yet? No, I've got an international flight though on Friday, so I'm fingers crossed it's on the plane. That's how I'm so busy now. That's how I get to watch a lot of these things. Jose says the blue guy in Watchmen was cringe. Watchmen film was visually better. I can't disagree with you there. And also the plot holes. So as I said, thanks for the support. Next week is Star Wars week. Thanks again for tuning in, and as I said, I really appreciate the support of the channel. If the link below doesn't work for you with PayPal, then please, there's a link on the homepage channel that you can click on to, and that works, I know, for most people most of the time. So that's where you can do that. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you next time. And as I said, if you've got ideas for future episodes of this live stream Forge, which we don't do as regularly, but it sort of focuses more on men's issues and stuff for men. If there's topics you'd like me to cover, drop me a line, let me know, and we'll start sort of creating episodes around some of those topics. You guys are awesome. Keep fighting the good fight. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time.